Well, I wonder if you remember a time when tanning was seen as a very healthy thing to do. People used to use things like tanning beds or spending hours in the sun drenched in coconut oil. It was a very popular pastime, but then with time, maybe you changed your mind. With that shift, that evolution, there was maybe an aha moment. Or maybe it was even a slow incremental shift to change that mind. Let's think about the idea of changing your mind. Psychology consultant and author Dr. Jo Lukens is with me now. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan.
Why is it difficult for people to change their minds?
It can feel really difficult for us to change our minds because our brains naturally want to be consistent with what we've done before. We like to, decrease the number of decisions we like to make, which is why we're so reliant on habits. So I guess in some ways it's a way of our brains like conserving energy and giving us that sense of stability. So to the example you gave, which is such a great example, when the evidence shifts, our brain has to reevaluate, and that decision to do something different to what we used to be doing is something that we have to come to terms with. So I think that's one of the challenges for us, is the brain works harder and then we have to do something differently to what we were doing before.
Yeah. What happens in our brains when we do actually shift that perspective?
Yeah, what we see and what we know about the brain is that much of that activity happens in the front of the brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, and it gathers new information and data, and we change the behaviour, whatever it might be. But the reward system in the brain sits closer to the base of the brain, and that's where we will get reinforced for our decisions, whether in our evaluation we've decided that we have made the wiser choice perhaps. So it's something of a neurological partnership, if you like, between the different areas of our brain that happen when we decide to do something differently, and then we evaluate it and work out whether or not that was a good decision.
So is changing our mind a sign of weakness or uncertainty?
I think sometimes it can be presented to us that is the case, that you're inconsistent, indecisive, and you keep changing your mind and so forth. But I do think particularly when we're making decisions, maybe it's something relating to our health, but the new evidence comes through, whatever it might be, it's certainly a sign of strength, that when we're changing our mind, we need a little bit of what we'd call cognitive flexibility, flexibility in our mind, a bit like we have flexibility in our bodies, we can have it in our minds as well. It might take some emotional intelligence for us, being open to learning new things. So all of these attributes are often linked to things like leadership and resilience. So there's definitely plenty of situations where changing your mind can not only be the wise decision, but it's going to get you closer to the goals that you're setting for yourself.
You're hearing from Dr. Jo Lukens about being decisive and maybe even changing our minds. So how does this science connect to performance in things like sport or business?
Rapid adjustment is really important in those kinds of environments. And even for anyone who was watching the World Athletics over the last couple of days, like the most recent day of it, it suddenly poured with rain.
Yeah.
And you watched athletes having to adapt and change and do things differently in a world championships, which is the pinnacle for many of those athletes of where they might be performing. So we know that in any of those kinds of environments, in business as well, adapting and changing to the world as things happen around us, executives have to know when to pivot. And that is that bravery of perhaps going against the status quo, that phrase of because that's the way we've always done it.
Yes.
This changing your mind sits perpendicular to that. So we know that our leaders have to have that capacity to evaluate information and know when to change the decisions.
What role does emotion play?
Emotions play a role in everything we do. As we've always talked about, as humans, we make it complicated, but we're simple creatures. We do things, we think things, and we feel things. So emotions are always going to have a play around our decision making. And particularly for us, if we feel anxious or stressed or embarrassed, our brain might resist change and it might want us to stay where we are, protect us from discomfort, if you like. So we know the emotions always have a place. So I always say to people, become aware of the emotions, be curious about them. Think, is this holding me back from doing something, or is this telling me maybe it's time to make a different decision? So I'd always pay attention to your emotions if they're coming into play when decision making is part of what you're doing.
How can we train ourselves to improve our fitness of when it comes to changing our mind. Can we train ourselves to be better at changing our minds?
We can, because what we can do is we can build some of those fundamental skills that we've talked about many times here on the show. So we've talked about the importance of being mindful. So what does that mean? It means being aware of what am I thinking, how am I feeling, what am I doing? Being able to reflect. Success leaves clues. So if something's gone well, think about why that's happened. What decisions do you need to maintain? If something didn't go to plan, what was the disappointment? What was the lesson? So how can we potentially be curious about making some changes there? And so we know all of that critical thinking really helps us in our decision-making process. So all of those things can assist us. And then doing some of those basic fundamental things that we know sets up ourselves for success. How are you going in terms of your fuel? Have you had enough rest? When was the last time you did some physical activity? All of those things set you up well to have a clearer mind, so that then when the decisions are being made, you'll know whether to maintain the current decision or whether to change it to something new.
Is there any misconceptions about changing your mind?
I think that the biggest one is the one we've already spoken to, that idea that because you changed your mind, you were wrong before or you lacked conviction. Maybe you changed your mind because new information came to light or we developed those. So I think, again, speaking to that, it's not a sign of weakness. It's just a sign that with what you know now in the situation that you're in, the pathway that you need to go has deviated or changed from what you were doing before.
Psychology consultant and author Dr. Jo Lukens, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. You are on ABC Queensland.